The day is finally here, and Project Caesar has finally been unveiled. To absolutely nobody's surprise, it is the 5th installment of the Europa Universalis franchise and the sequel to my most played game of all time, EU4. I've been very fortunate to have a working relationship with Paradox, and I've been in touch with people from Tinto for quite a while now. Many of you watching may know that a couple of months back, many content creators in the EU4 space were invited to meet with the developers in Barcelona. I was personally invited, but I did have to decline because my heir had just been born a couple of weeks before the trip, and I would feel guilty leaving my wife alone with a toddler and a newborn. Tragic? Yes, but this doesn't mean that I haven't been able to get my meaty paws into the game. I've been fortunate enough to be one of the few people in the world to have the privilege of playing EU5, and I put about 50 hours into the game in the past couple of weeks. I have a lot of opinions. Some good, some maybe not so good, but all very constructive, appreciative, and ultimately optimistic. First and foremost, it's important to note that this is my first impressions of a game that is still quite a ways off, with the release date not even being determined yet. My assumption is that we'll have a release sometime before the end of the year, but I don't have any inside information on that. Regardless, this will give the developers another 3 to 4 months minimum to prepare to ship the product. So what you're seeing in my footage and hearing in my commentary should not be taken as gospel. Things like gameplay, balance, user interface, tooltips, it's all going to change, and probably a lot based on the community feedback and internal playtesting. That's why I, as well as the wonderful people over at Paradox Tinto, definitely want to hear your thoughts. So at any time during this video, feel free to go down to the comments and leave your constructive feedback. Those sorts of discussions can really help shape the final product, which has been made abundantly clear specifically for EU5 based on the changes made from the feedback in the Tinto talks on the Paradox forums. What is the big picture takeaway? Well, EU5 is different. Quite different from EU4. And while that's not necessarily a bad thing, it's definitely something that has to be mentioned. If you love EU4, but you've always wanted it to be maybe a little deeper with trade, diplomacy, vassal management, etc., then EU5 is probably going to be exactly what you're hoping for. On the other hand, if EU4 was already overwhelming, or if you rely on console commands or lowering difficulty to stay afloat, then EU5 is probably going to be a pretty insurmountable mountain for you to climb. And though it is very complicated, much more so than EU4 in my opinion, there are some tools that I will go over later in the video that will lower the barrier of entry. So let's break things down, starting off with what I really like so far about EU5. First and foremost, let's talk about the major elephant in the room when it comes to Paradox Game Studio releases: the content. The absolute primary complaint about most PDX games when they drop is that they often feel bare bones, especially compared to the prior entry in the series. Many would say that these games release and they feel like they need an extra year plus of post-release support to reach the point where many players feel comfortable downloading it and giving it their time. I'm happy to say that in my limited time in the game, the content present is already surprisingly rich. EU5 already has thousands of events in the build that I played, many hundreds of them being nation-specific, packed with flavor and gameplay implications. I did see quite a few that I recognize from EU4, which is totally fine with me. The primary thing that I'm looking for in a sequel would be building upon the existing base of a previous title, which for all of its flaws, EU4 is a masterpiece in my eyes, at least in terms of content and replayability. On top of the events shipping with the game's release, there are dozens of what the game calls situations. Think of these like persistent disasters or large event chains from EU4, but now they are represented visually on the map with a dedicated UI that is complete with information, tooltips, buttons to interact with the situation, decisions, and so on. They're compelling, they're reactive, and possibly best of all, they're very moddable. Situations such as the Black Death and the 100 Years' War share the exact same system, but feel entirely distinct from each other. And while we're on that topic of major structural changes that are coming, international organizations have to be mentioned. In EU4, you have systems like the Holy Roman Empire or the Papacy, which are hard-coded and they're quite inflexible. In EU5, they've been decoupled into scriptable organizations, meaning that the Papacy, the Holy Roman Empire, custom union of states such as personal unions or defensive alliance networks can now all be represented as unique entities using the exact same underlying system. Different mechanics with different outcomes, but the same moddable framework. These organizations do not feel derivative at all, and it's a huge win for the modding community and for the variety of gameplay in the future. Between these structural upgrades and gameplay systems, there's one feature that really stands out for the flexibility that it offers depending on the kind of experience that you're looking for in the game, and that would be the automation options. EU5 lets you automate a staggeringly large number of tasks, from small things like balancing your budget or assigning cabinet members, to massive gameplay areas like market imports and exports, building construction, army behaviors, and more. What's great is how robust and customizable it is. You're never forced to automate, but you can pick and choose exactly which systems you want to manage manually. And it's never permanent, because if you decide to change your mind later, you just literally tick a box and it goes right back to control for you. It's a fantastic quality of life feature in my opinion, and it makes the game much more approachable without removing that control from the player if you want it. In my opinion, a grand strategy game should be able to be played without min-maxing and still have fun. But if you decide to min-max, then you get heavily rewarded for it. And I think EU4 is a really good example of that, same with like Hearts of Iron. And it definitely looks like EU5 is going to have a similar sort of thing. And there's a lot more to like about the game in my opinion, but those are kind of the major things that stood out to me as, hey, we need to be talking about this because this is a big deal. And while I have really enjoyed the early access that I've had, there's been a couple of complaints that I've had. I've tried to be very transparent and speak to Paradox about this stuff because obviously complaining about it in a YouTube video without actually telling the people who made the game, it's not really going to do much. So much of these complaints I may have, and you're probably going to hear from other people, they know about it. The major one, and without a doubt the one that you're going to hear the most about, is the user interface. In my opinion, this is the part of the game that needs the most work. Gameplay in general feels solid, and I genuinely enjoyed learning the core mechanics and systems, but the UI often made it feel like it was actively fighting against me to enjoy the game. Simple tasks can require a surprising number of clicks, and in my opinion, it is just way too much navigation. Take trade routes, for example. If you want to open one, you'll need to go to the economy or production panel, and then dig into the market you want to trade in, select the trade good, choose import or export, pick your target market, and then finally assign the trade capacity. That is a lot of steps for something that you very well may be doing multiple times per month at various parts of the game. Of course, you can automate it, but you shouldn't feel compelled to do it just because it's too much clicking. Conducting diplomacy isn't much better. Opening diplomatic menus with another nation depends on how zoomed out you are, which screen you already have open, or right-clicking and opening a drop-down, which in my opinion is just not nice. I do not like that. When you compare that to EU4's intuitive left-click to open the province, right-click to open up the country setup, it just feels clunky and it doesn't feel nice. They've also outright just removed the minimap, and the map mode options have been moved to the middle, which is a choice. I'm not a big fan of removing the minimap, and the hotkeys now have been set to a dedicated section of the settings menu rather than being able to just click a button, click the button that you want to rebind, and then hitting the button to rebind. You have to actually go into the settings to do that. And that's also kind of clunky, where it's like if you want to assign a map mode to a certain button, but there's already a hotkey assigned to that, it will actually push that hotkey and it will like make the effect happen even if you have the game paused for the settings menu. So it's very buggy. I imagine that will definitely be ironed out before release. But on top of that, you can actually only have one map mode per hotkey, where in E4 I think you could have like 5 that you cycle through. So that should be base game in my opinion, and I would be quite disappointed if that is not included in the release. Overall, the map mode selection and the mini-map being gone, it just feels like a total step backwards in terms of usability. And it feels like they kind of just changed stuff for the sake of change rather than improving an existing feature. I actually straight up told the developers, I'm like, just take the map from EU4 and update the UI to kind of match the theme of EU5 and just put it right back where it was before, because in my opinion, it was fine. There was nothing wrong with it. With all of my gripes about EU5's UI, you can and will need to do a lot more in EU5 than you ever did in EU4. That alone is going to lend itself to so much more UI work than the previous iterations of the games. The added depth is 100% worth celebrating. And like I said, most of this feedback has already been passed on to the developers, and I'm sure that we're going to see some pretty meaningful changes before launch. One more thing that's worth bringing up that I don't necessarily think is a good or bad thing, but I do think it's going to be fairly divisive with the player base, is going to be the game's pacing. EU5 feels slower than EU4, and I mean a lot slower. Not just performance, which is terrible, but I imagine that that's just because they haven't done optimization passes before release. I'm talking like you literally cannot take land in the early game in certain parts of the map. Blobbing is super hard and borderline impossible in places like the HRE. Casus Bellis are significantly harder to come by, oftentimes even requiring a specific reason to justify, which means you need to wait for the AI to like make a mistake for you to exploit. Like if the AI pirates you, you can go to war with them, but if they don't, then you just have to like sit there and wish they would. It just takes away player agency because you can't just fabricate a claim and say, hey, I want this land and I'm gonna take it. You can definitely still no CB like you could in EU4, and it does cost a lot of stability, but there's also places like the HRE where you're not allowed to no CB. It's banned entirely, so you're just gonna SOL. You can get Casus Bellis through the parliament, which for some reason every country in the game has a parliament, but you can basically trade parliamentary support for a justification to go to war using like a diplomatic insult CB, but it basically guarantees that you're going to fail your parliamentary debate. So it's like you're trading stability for a CB, and I don't know, it just doesn't feel good. So essentially what it does is it makes it so the early game you have to focus on building up your economy in your core territories. It's an economy simulator, almost like Victoria. You basically take all of the money that you make from trade, invest it back into buildings to bolster your trade even more. You want to avoid major wars because levies are absolutely garbage, and until you get the Professional Armies Institution, you can't really get manpower to start recruiting a regular army. But once Renaissance kicks in, it becomes a lot more active and you can actually kind of play the game. So the flow is incredibly different from EU4, and while I think some players are going to like it, I definitely think it's going to bounce off of some others. So as an avid lover of Paradox titles, I have to say I am cautiously optimistic. Emphasis on cautiously, but definitely optimistic. I think the Paradox Tinto has been cooking. I think this project has been in the works for a long time, and you can totally tell there's a lot of love that has gone into it. And once they iron out a few things like the user interface and maybe some AI logic stuff, I think that we will have an absolute beast of a game on our hands. Stay tuned because you're going to be getting plenty more exclusive EU5 content on this channel here. So if you haven't already subscribed, make sure you subscribe. And if you like this video, make sure that you leave a like. Like I said before, if you have feedback about what I said or what Tinto has shown off so far, leave it in the comments down below and I will make sure to pass on anything I can to the developers. But I appreciate you watching this video. I hope you have a wonderful day.